Hi, welcome to Telehealth Basics. I'm Jill Shook. I'm a speech language pathologist in private practice in Pittsburgh. I wanted to talk about telehealth because if you've been on the internet any time in the last year or two, you have seen the words telehealth, you've seen telepractice, you've seen teletherapy, and you're probably wondering about it. So I wanted to give you some information. In general, ASHA likes to use the term telepractice for speech language pathologists like us and audiologists who are providing teletherapy, telehealth, telepractice services. So I'll be using the term telepractice throughout this presentation. Telepractice is really just the provision of services via a telecommunications method at a distance with a client. It can also be considered talking with a colleague, say you want to talk with a referral source or you're talking to a pediatrician or another speech therapist. But in general, if I'm using the term telepractice, I'm talking about us as speech therapists providing speech therapy services to a client at a distance. There are three different options for the ways that we can provide telepractice. They can be synchronous, they can be asynchronous, or they can be a hybrid. Synchronous is when you are live with the person that you are providing the therapy for. So it's kind of like Skype. You're both on the computer at the same time. You both have the video and audio at the same time. Asynchronous would be if you were sending information to someone like a video recording or an audio recording that they could see at a later date. So, you're providing therapy, but it's not at the same time, and it's using the telecommunications platform. Hybrid is if you were doing both. Not many therapists would do that because that would be, if you were having a live conversation, but you were also sending them a video that they could watch or an audio clip that they could listen to at the same time. But in general, we like to do the synchronous provision because that seems to be the most effective for our clients. And in general, when insurance companies want to pay for telepractice, they are requiring you to be doing synchronous telepractice. So what do you need in order to do telepractice? What do you need in order to say, I'm a teletherapist? The first thing you need is to verify that you have the information for your state and the licensure that you need in order to provide telepractice services in that state. Some states have specific requirements for licensure for teletherapists. In general, you can just use the license that you have. If you're already licensed as an SLP in your state, then you can practice teletherapy there. You have to be licensed in the state that you're in, obviously, just like for any other type of therapy. But you also have to be sure that you are licensed in the state that your client is in. So that's a requirement by insurance. It's also a requirement by ASHA. So if you, are in where I am in Pennsylvania, you have to be licensed in Pennsylvania. You have your SLP license there. And then you would also have to have a license wherever your client is. So if they were in Montana, then you would have to have a Montana license and keep up with the licensure required for that. So their, continuing education, any requirements that you would have if you lived in Montana as an SLP, you would have to make sure you had those licensure requirements taken care of. So that's really the biggest administrative differences between in-person therapy and telepractice, is that you have to be licensed in both of the states, and you have to make sure that you keep up with that licensure, even if it seems, different than the licensure in your own state. If you're planning on providing telepractice sessions for schools, you also have to make sure that you have any teaching certification requirements in the state in which your client is. So for instance, in Pennsylvania, where I am, you have to have a teaching certificate to work in the schools with kids from kindergarten through 12th grade. So if I wanted to provide teletherapy in Pennsylvania, like I do, I have to maintain my teaching certificate as well as my SLP license. And you want to make sure that you have, again, your license in the state you're in, the state that your client is in. You want to have your teaching certificate in the state that you're in, and you would also have to have it in the state that your client is in if you were working with schools. Lastly, you have to verify the insurance requirements for telepractice. In many states, there are parity laws such that if you were billing for a speech therapy service in person, they would also cover that via teletherapy. So if you did 92522, you did an Arctic evaluation with that CPT code, they would cover that via teletherapy if they covered it in person. Or they would do, if you're billing the CPT code 92507 for general therapy, they would cover that via teletherapy as well. But that doesn't apply to all states, and the legislation has been changing in different states, usually to become more inclusive of teletherapy, but you want to make sure that you check so that you aren't providing services that aren't covered or that are not really in a gray area. Because if it's in a gray area, you can be sure that insurance probably will not cover it. As of now, Medicaid often covers telepractice. Medicare does not currently cover telepractice. So if you work for adults, it's very difficult to provide telepractice for anyone who already has Medicare because Medicare does not cover speech therapy via telepractice. As far as billing for telepractice, there's really not a big difference between billing for an in-person session or a telepractice session. All you need to do is add the code modifier 95 to your CPT code. So say you were billing for that therapy session that we mentioned earlier, it would be 92507, modifier would be 95 to show that it was delivered via synchronous telecommunications technology. And then you would change the location code to 2 for a telepractice. So they do have that option on the CMS 1500 claim form for telepractice. Some insurances require that you do include the GN modifier to show that the speech therapy is under a speech therapy plan of care and not at a hospital. But in general, you do have to have that 95 modifier if it's telepractice. But otherwise, there are no differences in the billing. You would submit the claims just the way you would as an in-person session. So how do you decide if teletherapy is right for you, if you would want to get into telepractice and be a teletherapist? You have to think about the pros and cons. Some of the pros of telepractice are obviously you don't have a commute time. So if you're tired of sitting in the car all day, this is a really good option for you. At one of my school-based positions, I had 14 different schools that I was assigned to be at every week. And that got old really fast. So teletherapy was looking really good for me after I was in that position. So obviously your commute time is from your kitchen to wherever your computer is. You also don't have to worry about kids sneezing on you, coughing on you, vomiting on you, all of the fun stuff you get to worry about in schools. There's no disease transmission. So if your client has a cold or lice or one of those communicable things that you don't want to get, but they're still well enough to do therapy, you can do therapy because they can't get you sick. You also don't have to worry about any materials to haul around. You have your computer and all of your files will be on there. If you want to have any kind of backdrop things or props to show the client, you would have that. But in general, everything you do will be on the computer. You don't have to haul around notebooks. You don't have to haul around any games or crafts or anything. Also, you don't have to wear pants if you don't want to. They can't see above, they only see above the waist, so you wouldn't have to worry about that. In general, I would recommend wearing pants just to be professional. But you can wear scrubs. You could, wear scrub pants or leggings if you wanted to. But you don't have to wear business casual except, your top. So that's another awesome pro of teletherapy. Another pro of telepractice is that it's generally covered by insurance, like we had talked about. In general, if the in-person therapy is covered, that same CPT code will be covered for teletherapy. So you don't have to worry about, adding anything else to your practice, learning new codes or anything. It would be covered. Another pro of teletherapy is that you don't have to have office space. You don't have to pay for a large office with clinic treatment rooms. You can just have a home office space in your home with minimal distractions, and that area will be where you do your teletherapy. It can be a corner of your room. It can be, in your basement. It doesn't have to be a whole office space that you have to rent out. So that keeps the overhead costs very low for teletherapy. Conversely, some cons of telepractice are that you don't get that interactive aspect with a client. So some kids really need like crafts or Play-Doh or tactile aspects of therapy in order to really connect better with it or to stay still. And you won't have that with teletherapy because you're working through a screen. You also don't get that face-to-face with, school personnel or, families of clients. So you don't get to go and, meet Mr. and Mrs. Smith face-to-face. You have to see them through a computer screen. And sometimes that can kind of change the relationship between you as the provider and the parents or the client or the school personnel because they don't see you every day. They don't see you sitting at lunch. They don't see you, coming in and going to IEP meetings. They just see you on a computer. And another very real con is that a lot of people think that teletherapy sessions aren't real therapy. They think in-person therapy is real therapy and telepractice is kind of like less therapy, not really therapy. I've seen that a lot when I've, worked with schools. They don't think of the teletherapist as a real therapist. And that's not true. It's a stigma that's become attached to that part of our profession. But it's very real, and it's something that you will have to work with and deal with as a teletherapist. Another con of teletherapy is that, as I mentioned before, Medicare does not cover teletherapy, and Medicaid usually covers it, but may not. So there might be clients that could benefit from teletherapy that you aren't able to treat because it's not covered. And as you know, with Medicare, you cannot treat someone who has Medicare if you are not a Medicare provider. So even if they want to pay out of pocket, you can't provide teletherapy for them if they already have Medicare. An ergonomic concern or con of teletherapy is that you do a lot of sitting. So whereas in another situation you'd be running up and down the school halls, or you'd be walking around our hospital, or in private practice if you're going up and down your clinic hallway, in teletherapy you're sitting. They have options. You can get like little like ellipticals you could put under your desk, or you can get up and schedule breaks in. But it's a lot of sitting in comparison to different types of therapy. And a final consideration of teletherapy is that it's very difficult to do a complete and thorough oral mech exam for clients, especially articulation clients. Since you can't really reach through the screen and be able to see into those oral structures, it'd be really hard to diagnose like a submucous cleft, or if their tonsils were large or anything. You'd really have to train the helper or the parent or whomever was with the client to be able to do that. And that doesn't work for a lot of people, especially if it's like a school situation where, there are different paraprofessionals, or, there's a teacher or a parent that might be coming in and out. It would be very difficult to make that happen. Whereas in person, it's very easy to do those, oral mech exams. Another consideration for telepractice that could be either a pro or a con, depending on how you think about it, is that you have to have fast internet. You can't have dial-up internet that's just spinning and spinning and spinning. You have to have very fast internet that's able to handle the graphics and the audio of synchronous video, so that you can be quick and able to talk to your client. You don't have to wait for it to load. You don't have to wait for them to talk and it's all breaking up. You have to make sure you have that fast internet. Which is great because then, when you're done, you can watch Netflix really fast and it will be clear. But you want to make sure that you have that fast internet connection, which can be a little bit expensive. But again, not nearly as expensive as having an office space. So if you go through the pro and con list and you look at your caseload and you look at teletherapy and decide, hey, this is something that I'd like to do, there are some things that you need in order to be a successful teletherapist. You need a computer, obviously, with a webcam and a set of headphones. You want this to be a newer computer, probably not older than 5 years, which even 5 years seems kind of old for a computer at this point. A laptop is okay, but really a desktop is your best option because usually their graphics and their audio are much better. And you want to present a very professional look to your client. You don't want it to be grainy. You don't want it to be, jumping around and the audio be unclear. You want to be as professional as possible, especially if you're working in a school and you know that there's kind of a negative stigma associated with telepractice as being less professional. You also have to have teletherapy software on your computer. You can't just, open Skype or do FaceTime because those aren't HIPAA compliant options. You have to have a specific software that is secure enough to do health-related therapy with. When you're evaluating a platform to decide to use for your practice for telehealth, there are some considerations you want to keep in mind. You want to make sure that the platform offers an interactive function known as screen sharing. And in general, that's just where you are able to share the screen that you see with the client. One way to use that is to pull up like a PDF on your screen, and then you'll be able to share that window or share that screen with the client. So that enables you to be able to see the same thing and work on the same thing with them instead of trying to describe it like, pretend there's a bird in the left corner and the kid is not paying attention anymore. So you can see the picture, you can both interact with it that way, and that makes it more interactive than if you were just speaking with the client. Just like if you're in person and you give them a worksheet, you're able to both see the same worksheet and you're working on that. Screen sharing is also necessary for doing evaluations via telepractice, which we will get to in a later section. As we mentioned, as a pro of teletherapy, you don't have to have any hard materials or hard copies of materials, but you do have to have materials to use with the client. So you're going to need PDFs, maybe digital books, maybe downloaded movie clips. There are a lot of, online providers. There's Boom Learning that does Boom cards. Those you can use with therapy, and there are some that are game providers for speech therapy and other types of teletherapy. But you won't have, your games and stuff that you would have in a regular therapy session. In addition to needing the software for teletherapy, you also have to understand the software for teletherapy as well as other types of software on your computer. You're going to need Acrobat Reader to make sure that you can download the PDFs and use them. You have to have a basic understanding of how screen sharing works. And if your teletherapy software offers it, you also need to know how to use the annotation part, which is when the software allows you to share a screen with a client and then use some sort of tool to draw or write or mark on the PDF or the page so that the client can see it. So it's basically like you're coloring or doing a worksheet, but it's on your computer. So you need to know how to do that and how to use that effectively to work with your clients. Another thing that you need to have in order to do telepractice correctly is a quiet location. You can't be, doing telepractice at Starbucks. You can't be doing it on your front porch. You can't do it in somewhere with a lot of foot traffic if you have an office. You want it to be in a quiet place with very minimal distractions for noise, and you also want it to have minimal visual distractions. You would want something like the area behind me that is clear, that doesn't have a lot of, visual mess. You could even just do, a blank wall or have one picture or so on there, but you don't want like a bookshelf with tons of stuff on it. You don't want, a ton of pictures of your family unless, you're doing a session on talking about family. And then you could use that as props, but you wouldn't want that in general to have a lot of clutter behind you. It's already going to be more difficult for the client to focus on you, especially if they're younger and they're doing teletherapy. So you don't want to be competing with all the mess behind you. And speaking of children, if you have children, you want to make sure that you have childcare for them. It's impossible to do teletherapy with your kids at home. Some people might tell you that it isn't, but it is. I guess I should say it's impossible to do professional teletherapy with your kids at home because they're going to be running around. They're always going to need something at an inopportune time. If they cry or if they run through the screen, that can even be a HIPAA violation because, they're seeing the client, hearing the client that's there. So if you have kids, they definitely either have to be in school, and that's when you do your teletherapy, or you need to have childcare for them. Another consideration for being a successful teletherapist is being able to have the correct assessment and evaluation materials in order to work with your clients. So you can't just, take any test that you have and like hold up the manipulatives or hold up the picture boards for the client to see and then, count that as an evaluation. You have to use tests that have been released to be used via teletherapy. And there are quite a few. WPS has WP Global with quite a few tests online. Pearson has Q Interactive, and Q Interactive actually allows, iPad administration as well. So you could have the iPad separate, have pictures up on your computer, and be able to screen share that and do that correctly. But again, you can't just kind of retrofit any test you have to use for teletherapy. So after you decide if telepractice is a good fit for you as a clinician, you have to decide how to find a client that is a good fit for telepractice. So in general, a lot of clients that you would see in person are good fits for telepractice. Again, every client is different, every need is different, but you can use a set of guidelines to decide if a client is a good fit. So firstly, you have to decide if they have the attention in order to listen to you over the internet. Sometimes just having that distance of being on a computer can make it really difficult for younger students and younger kids to be able to pay attention to you as the therapist. Whereas in person, you'd be able to kind of, sit their chair in a certain way or sit next to them or use, a different sort of toy or a movement break. That can be difficult when you have telepractice because you would have to work with the person who's with the client in order to help them do that or not do it at all. So you have to figure that out if they are able to sustain that attention. You also have to keep in mind their hearing ability. If you have a client that has difficulty with hearing, it might be difficult for them to interact with you on the computer. Even if you have headphones and they have headphones, it might be difficult for them to get the full speech that you're using. So if they have difficulty with hearing, or you recognize that they're going to have some difficulty attending to you, if they have difficulty with their hearing, you want to make sure that you keep that in mind. You also have to keep in mind their manual dexterity. So they're going to need to be able to click a mouse, to type if they're older, to maybe move a trackpad around. So you have to keep that in mind if you're deciding on a client, if they have that manual dexterity, or if the helper for them, the aide for them, is able to do that for them. But again, that can add a separate layer of difficulty to working with the client, where you have to instruct the aide to move things for the client. So you have to keep that in mind as well. You also have to keep in mind that the client needs a computer. They need to have access to a computer, consistent access to a computer that has a webcam. They can't be doing teletherapy at a library or somewhere public, other than a school. A school would be if you were having a school contract. But if you're seeing, private clients for teletherapy, they need to have, a quiet place for teletherapy with a computer with a webcam, good internet speed. So they're going to need to have access to those aspects of technology in order to be a good fit for teletherapy. In order to figure out if your client has these characteristics, schedule an interview with them, either via the phone, or you can try to set up an interview with them via the teletherapy software in order to see how they interact with it, how they interact with you, just kind of getting a feel for if you're able to see the client, working with you, if they can attend to you, just like you would with any other evaluation. A client comes in and you can tell immediately, when they walk in the door, kind of how the evaluation might go. You can kind of see when you're working with a client via teletherapy, how therapy might go with them based on how they're interacting with you. So if they're, bouncing off the walls and climbing all over the chair and knocking over the computer, you have to keep that in mind that maybe that might not be the best fit for them. They might need something a little more interactive and maybe, a home-based or school-based therapist. Another consideration to keep in mind for your telepractice clients is to see if your client actually wants to work with teletherapy, if they are open to telepractice to receive their services. Some people haven't heard of it and are open to trying telepractice. Others haven't heard of it and aren't open to trying it. Other people have heard of it and don't think it would work for them. And as part of doing evidence-based practice, we have to keep, the client's requests and perspective in account. And if they don't want to do teletherapy, they don't think it will work for them, you can't force them, and you shouldn't force them to try to do a type of therapy that they don't think will work. After you determine that a client is a good fit for your practice and you are ready to provide teletherapy, you can get ready to provide an evaluation. It's completely possible to do a thorough evaluation via telepractice. You just have to know how to do it correctly. So you want to start off, like I had mentioned earlier, with the correct type of testing materials. You want to use your digital testing materials. Again, you can't just hold up a piece of paper and ask them the question for the picture. You have to use the materials that are available and have been standardized and are able to be used for teletherapy. There are many options for that. There will be some links under the video for those. When you actually get to the testing day, what you'll want to do is have the testing questions opened in one window on your computer and have the pictures for the client to see open in another. So just like in person, if you had your testing easel and then you had the record form for the client, you would have your testing easel pictures. Those are the digital pictures that are on the computer. And then your record form would be digital as well, and you would be filling that out digitally as well. Then what you would do is screen share those pictures to the client so that they would be able to see it. So you would keep the record form for yourself, just like you would in person. You're not going to be, showing the client. You're going to keep that to yourself. And then you would be showing the client via screen share the pictures that they need to see for their test. And then you would proceed as usual for a test. You would ask them the questions, you would fill in the responses on your form digitally, and then you would, click a button to go to the next page. And then when you were done, you would be able to close out the window and go back to your regular teletherapy session. As we all know, Online communication, especially teletherapy, is not going away, it's just getting more prevalent, and it can be a great addition to your practice. So it's worth looking into and deciding if it's a good option for you. If you have more questions or want more information, there are some great resources linked below.